Hi, and welcome back to the channel. This week I'm doing a fun challenge to push myself out of my comfort zone and get to know my art supplies a bit better. I have a few supplies that I've been neglecting, which have been pushed to the back of the cupboard, so I'm hoping to reconnect with these and try out some new mixed media combinations. I'm writing all of the materials that I have to hand onto little scraps of paper, which I'll then pick out of the mug at the end. The challenge is then to combine these three materials and make a piece of art in my sketchbook. So stick around to see which three supplies I pick and what I can create from them. I've got set up with my three materials, the drawing pencils, soft pastels and acrylic ink, and I'll be working with them in my sketchbook as a way of experimenting and playing around with that combination of mixed media. So it's a completely new combination to me, so I'm not really sure how the materials are going to work together and what I'm going to be able to create with them. But I think it's a really interesting idea to experiment with materials that you perhaps wouldn't usually put together. So I'll start by putting some ink down. And I think I'll do a sort of seascape scene. So I've masked off a square composition and a rectangular landscape composition. And I'm just using some ultramarine blue mixed with burnt sienna acrylic inks to start. And in terms of the composition, I'm going to keep it really simple, just the usual thirds composition, because I want this to be a focus on the materials really rather than anything else. And then perhaps going in with some soft pastels already on this one. So I definitely don't usually tend to mix these three materials, the soft pastels with the ink and the Derwent drawing pencils. I'm not too sure how I'm going to incorporate those yet, but it'd be really interesting. And this soft pastel, because I've dried off areas and blotted it down with the kitchen paper, it's going really nicely actually over the top. So I already like that. I'm going to try and keep quite a limited palette here. I'm also not too sure how well this paper is going to cope with the ink. I haven't used acrylic inks too much in my pith sketchbook before, but I think it's coping quite well. There's no bleed through on the other side, so that's good. So now that this part of the page has got a bit of soft pastel on it, see how the ink, oh that's really interesting, how the ink goes on top of that soft pastel. The soft pastel is really quite resisting it. I'm being quite gentle with the ink, but that's lovely. I'll just hold that up to the camera, but you can see how the dust of the soft pastel is resisting that ink that I've laid down lightly over the top. So that's lovely, I really like that. And it's these little unexpected moments of play with materials that you can really learn new things about how they could blend together. And just incorporating different techniques into your usual work. So I really liked that technique, so I'm going to do a bit of that in this top piece as well. Really lightly go in with some, oh, it's not resisting as much, perhaps because I blended it this time. Okay, so I'll have to leave quite a lot of the dust, I think, for it to resist the ink. Let's try that again. What was with this? If I put quite thick down and leaving the dust, and go over the top. Ah, see, it's not doing it as much this time. I don't know what was different here. Perhaps it's the type of pastel I used. So in this one I was using a unison pastel, but in this one I was using the Jackson's handmade pastel. So I'll use that Jackson's down there. We'll try again. Yeah, see, the Jackson's pastel resists so much more than the unison pastel to create that lovely effect. So that's really interesting. I do always love the Jackson's handmade pastels. I find them really great quality. So that top one is looking a bit of a mess now. What can we do? I might put some more of this Jackson's in just to add a bit of brightness back to the sky. Yeah, that's really nice. And I've lost the horizon line a bit. It's not that I always want a horizon line, because I do like to play around with how the sky blurs into the horizon, but it just gives a bit of structure to the composition. Perhaps that's how I could use the Derwent drawing pencils as a final layer over the top to tidy the areas up and add more of a focus onto the horizon line. I've also not done myself very many favours here by picking probably the two messiest of materials, the soft pastels and the acrylic ink.
Just where it was needed, gleaming black as night, cloistered in injustice, dead in the eye of time. Nobody is losing, faces merge and change, but your face remains the same. Swallows will be here by dawn. When we're finally sober, they'll be gone.
I'm really liking the transparent layers of this, how it's building up. So you can see now that I've lifted that ink, it's created this really lovely transparent layer of what you can see from the previous ink layer that I put down. So I want a bit of structure in here.
sober, they'll be gone. The trees will bloom and ice will melt.
And then I wonder what would happen if it applied quite a thick layer of acrylic white ink just over the top, because I do really want to lighten some of these areas up. So that's quite nice. Never really used acrylic ink in this way. Almost like painting with it. So it's definitely interesting, and it's teaching me a lot about how these materials work together. I'm really liking this lower piece. I think this one's got a bit muddy and messy, particularly up here, so I'll try and fix that, but I'm not too sure how. Let's try and put some more of this pink pastel in. Final touch of pastel on this one, I think. Although that's now resisting. Okay, that's going to have to be ink, I think. I just drop some onto the paper. That works a bit better. See how much the pastel is now resisting that ink. I guess I'm sort of creating a paste on the paper between the pastel and the ink. So it'll be interesting to see how this dries. And also doing this in my sketchbook, because on a final piece I'm not sure how these materials would really perform in terms of longevity. It's really interesting just playing with materials and learning more about how you can use them, what effects they create. I mean, if you're anything like me, you've probably got lots of materials and you don't use all of them as much as each other. You'll get stuck using the same materials quite regularly and into a very familiar pattern with them, and then you don't really explore with many of your other materials. So I'll leave that to dry and peel the masking tape off, and then I think for my final touches, when this is dry, I'll go over with some of the Derwent drawing pencils. That's dried off a bit now, so I'll go over, if I can, with the Derwent drawing pencils to add a bit of definition and emphasise some marks that are already on the paper. And it's interesting to see that these are actually going quite well over the top of the soft pastel. think these Derwent drawing pencils are wax based and they're lovely and soft, and they go well over quite a lot of materials, so I highly recommend them. And I'm just going in with the ink blue at the moment, just shading in some darker areas. And they're just pushing all of this pastel dust out of the way, which is quite interesting.
If you do love me, you should let me go. I am all the rush you've been waiting for, and you said at least this is what you want. If you do love me, you'll be hanging on.
So I really like that texture at the top there, where I'm using the pencil on its side, dragging it through the soft pastel. That's really beautiful.
With a small mistake, you can't fix a thing that you cannot break. Am I over you? Am I over this?
And I think I'll go in with a bit of the sanguine, just to emphasise that colour, because I did really like that colour at the start initially. I'm so impressed with these crayons, they're just going right over the top of everything.
Everything you do will make it fall. In my eyes you're something, in my eyes you're wrong.
So over the acrylic ink in that area, over the soft pastel in that area.
If you do love me, you should let me go. I am all the rush you've been waiting for, and you said at least this is what you want. If you do love me, you'll be hanging on. Everything you know is not your fault. In my eyes you're something, in my eyes you're wrong. Everything you do will make it fall. In my eyes you're something, in my eyes you're wrong. In my eyes you're wrong.
I could keep on going with these Derwent drawing pencils, adding more layers over the top, because they're just so fun to work with, and they've created some really lovely striking marks, and the colours as well have gone really well into this composition. But I'll stop for now, and it just goes to show that playing around with new materials, you can learn so much about how they work together, what textures you can create, and I'm really pleased with some of the textures in these pieces. Here especially, where the ink has sat on top of the soft pastel dust and that's resisted it, and where I've put the Derwent drawing pencil over the top of the pastel as well, that's a lovely texture, and just how the ink's blurred into all the different materials. I'm really happy with the colour palette as well, that was a bit of a surprise, and that's inspired me to potentially use those in a painting. And I quite like these vertical marks that are interrupting that horizon. But yeah, it's just been a really fun exercise. So I encourage you to make a list of all your art materials that you have to hand, pop them in a pot, pick 3 out at random, and have a go experimenting on how they work together. So I hope this video was useful, and let me know if you have a go at the exercise too, and which 3 materials did you pick out. There won't be a video next week, but I'll be back in 2 weeks' time. As always, thank you so much for watching.